Here at the Craft Beer Channel, we're on a mission to get UNESCO status for cask ale. In our opinion, the best way to serve beer and a beautiful part of the UK's heritage. We strongly believe that UNESCO recognition will help arrest decades of decline in cask sales. And you can help by drinking some, signing our petition and joining our Patreon. In the meantime, we're releasing some fascinating feature-length documentaries of our favourite cask ale breweries, all filmed while making our award-winning series Keep Cask Alive. This week we're on the North Kent coast in a historic town called Faversham. Its vital role in British beer history is hard to overestimate. As we'll learn, it's where the first hops reached our shores, the first hop gardens were planted, and it's still home to the UK's oldest and largest independent brewery. If that's not enough history and histrionics, Brad and I decided to introduce this week's episode from a pub built in the 1300s. Hi Beer Geeks, welcome to the Craft Beer Channel and welcome to an episode about a brewery that was founded when Shakespeare was alive.
It's pretty amazing, Johnny. We're in Faversham and we're going to be visiting Shepherd Neame, which I think Faversham and Shepherd Neame are kind of a little hidden jewel of Kent. This town is ancient. The pub we're in is from the 13th century.
1300s. Crusades were still happening when
Absolutely bonkers to think
Yeah.
about. This is the oldest brewery in the UK, right? And it's still in family hands.
Yep.
Somehow, throughout the hundreds of years they've had.
Yeah, so it's a really complicated history, but we're going to be digging into the archives. We're going to be speaking to Jonathan Neame, fifth generation owner of the brewery, and obviously drinking some of the delicious beers.
From the days of the Bard to the days of the Brad, this is Shepherd Neame. Welcome to Faversham.
Shepherd Neame is found right in the heart of Faversham. It's mostly Victorian architecture setting the tone for the rest of the town, which was once a thriving port and industrial centre famous for its cement and gunpowder. Today it's a beautiful tourist spot, in part thanks to the allure of the brewery and its wonderful pubs. The story of how they all survived when other industries fell apart is complicated, so we started our tour with some questions for brewery archivist John Owen in his leather and oak-lined office.
You are the oldest surviving brewery in the UK.
Yes.
Can we talk a little bit about the date? Because it does say 1698
Yes.
on the branding.
I did not invent that date. Very few businesses just appear like a sort of shooting star. You get this transfer of technology and you have a critical time in which a number of things come together, a number of business attributes and people come together. And there is no doubt at all that we have been on this site since at least 1573. And we know that because there are very substantial Faversham town records of lists of inhabitants and all sorts of assessments, etc., which list inhabitants and they go street by street. And the order in which these names were set out is constant. So we can see, and because of these annual payments brewers had to make, we know the names of the brewers. So we've got, on the one hand, we've got lists of brewers and their names.
Yeah.
On the other hand, we've got street lists of inhabitants. So you have John Caslock in your brewer's find list, and there you are. You've got John Caslock here. So we have an indisputable audit trail. Now, I don't believe that any other business has an audit trail like that. The first known brewing family here was Caslock. They were related to the last abbot of Faversham. So there is possibly a transfer of technology from the Abbey brew house to here. So we've got 3 generations of Caslocks. The first Caslock was 23 when he started here. So clearly had some nous, had some drive, very little money probably, but he started to build the business, and his son and grandson built it up. Then the family fails, by which I mean failure of heirs. Then you get the next family, Marsh, and again you get a young guy who's a younger son, has virtually no money, but clearly has drive and ability. and his family, the Marsh family, who were behind Deal, they clearly would have had a tradition of growing barley and probably malting, and so supplying the hop world and the brewing world. So he arrives here, and then you get another very interesting quirk, that the business was carried on by Marsh Jr.'s wife. And there are a number of examples in our history where the women, a widow, carried on the business. And we had this earlier with one of the Caslocks, but so Mrs. Marsh carried on the business. She remarried a maltster who died soon after. She then remarried for a second time Mr. Shepherd, and they built the business up, and then it was taken over by their two sons. It wasn't given to them; it wasn't inherited. The sons had to work their way in. They became partners, so they took business profits. They didn't get any of the buildings or the estate. They had to pay interest on that, and then, of course, when parents died, they got their interest. So that's how the Shepherds come in, and one has 4 generations of Shepherds who built it up, and then rather sort of flattened out and nearly collapsed in the 1820s, 30s, but got going again by taking in a new partner, John Henry Mayers, young man, chemist, from Maidstone, probably knew a bit about brewing. Certainly would have known probably a bit about the chemistry of brewing. And there was a huge uplift in the late 1850s, early 1860s, very much as a result of the coming of the railways. Clearly, the Shepherds had and by that time, John Henry Mayers, who was the brother-in-law of Percy Neame, the chemist, to join the business. They clearly had a view that this was the way forwards. This was the technology which was going to give the business a huge twist, which it did. But they didn't invest immediately. They ran the old business to absolutely maximum capacity. And when they clearly realised that this wasn't a flash in the pan development, they invested a great deal of money. They invested something like £20,000, which is a lot of money in the early 1860s. They built the new brew house, which is down here. They built the new warehouses down the road. They built the new enormous malt house up by the Faversham station. And their investment was returned in absolute heaps.
Amazing.
They got it absolutely right.
Yeah.
And they did really quite well. Shepherd Neame did very well in the 1920s and the 30s after it. It suffered in the First World War. And Shepherd Neame is still here.
Still here.
And outseen Rigdon's over the road, who sold out and ultimately absorbed by Whitbread, which alas doesn't exist now.
Do you think, well, obviously, one of the reasons why we're still here is you've never sold out. It's still...
Well, as I've said before, if
Yeah.
you the aim of every business always has been, I assume always will be, unless we're all consigned to North Korea, will be to produce a product that people want and at a price they can afford. And it's not always easy to work out either of those things. It's science and graft and
Artistry,
magic,
luck.
and magic, and a certain amount of luck.
With the remarkable context of Shep's survival in our minds, we next sat down with Jonathan Neame to hear how his family, now 5 generations into running the brewery, became involved, and what place the brewery has in the past and future of Faversham and the wider brewing industry. So we've had the full history from John Owen, but it'd be great to hear how the Neames got involved at the brewery.
Yeah. Well, to cut a long story short, there was a major investment in a railway, North Kent Railway, 1857. The Shepherds brought in a financier called Henry Mayers. The brewery was briefly called Shepherd and Mayers. He put the money up for the new brew house, which was completed in 1864, and then promptly dropped down dead. He was married to my great-great-aunt, and so she suddenly found that she owned half a brewery, and called on her brother, my great-great-grandfather, to say, can you come in and represent my interests, run the company. So Shepherd Neame per se existed for only 13 years, for 1864 to 1877. And in 1877, my great-great-grandfather bought out the remaining shareholding interests of the Shepherd family, and their interest therefore ended after 5 generations. So from 1877 onwards, it's actually been the Neame family brewery, but still called Shepherd Neame, out of respect for the previous owners.
Yeah, because I guess the Neames, the long history of this brewery actually have only been in full control for a quarter of it, maybe, or so.
We are very new guys on the block.
Yeah, amazing. Which given the breweries that we mostly visit that are probably only 10 years old, it's incredible to say that the Neames are sort of the new kids on the block.
It's an interesting evolution, as you would have heard, of from one family to the next, sort of being passed on. Never a sort of a takeover or anything like that. Never. No new shares have been issued. No one's come in, particularly with new money, except for Henry Mayers, for a particular purpose. So it's an extraordinary natural evolution, really, either through marriage or in the other ways described.
Yeah, which I guess is one of the big strengths and the reasons why Shepherd Neame has sort of flourished, particularly through the 60s and 70s, that big consolidation. The fact that the Neame sort of managed to resist that is why we have what we have today.
Yeah, I think the 60s were a very bad time for the brewing industry generally because of penal death duties, which did for a lot of family brewers when the wrong family member died at a particular time. In our case, my grandfather died in 1961, and I think it was the devil's own job to keep the business going because the tax, was something like 98% tax on his death, and I know it was very, very painful for my father, who had to mortgage everything to sort of keep the thing going at that stage. So that was a dangerous time. There've been many moments of jeopardy, which is another sort of point that is of interest, that somehow we've got through those. My great-great-grandfather died on the eve of the First World War, and the business had quite a lot of debt and so on, and of course the First World War was terrible for all business. Multiple moments of jeopardy, but somehow we found a way to get through it.
What you talked about, sort of moments of crisis. A lot of the narrative right now around cask ale brewers is that we're in another one. Is that a fair kind of representation of that, or is it exaggerated?
I think the industry generally is in a very difficult time. The cumulative impact of COVID, the Ukraine war, inflation, and now sort of multiple increases in tax, etc., is very, very challenging for the sector. And I'm afraid the reality is we will continue to see less pubs and probably less breweries as we go through a sort of consolidation phase. If you take the widest span of history, that has always happened. On cask itself, there's also, counter to the shrinking part of the market, the counter trend is that there's more choice on the bar. So every pub has got probably more brands than it's ever had, more flavour spectrums than it's ever had. Cask is presenting a unique and fresh and delicious flavour, but it does have the challenge of relying on throughput. So some of the challenges the sector has of, certainly in rural areas, many pubs shutting on Monday and Tuesday because they can't find the staff or it's more economic to do so. All of that undermines the necessary throughput to keep cask beer fresh.
And where does that sort of leave Shepherd Neame in terms of looking at the future of cask? Because you produce a lot of, some keg beer and a lot of lager. How much focus is still on cask with those issues?
Oh, total. All of our passion and all of our pride is on ale generally, cask specifically. We have got a very strong cask club. The brewers have produced some amazing new flavours recently, which go down very well. We've got our sort of classics like Master Brew, which is a very popular beer locally, a classic seasonal beer like Late Red, and then beers like Bishop's Finger, which are on cask, much loved, but don't really have the demand to keep going through the summer because they're quite a strong winter beer. So it's very much front of mind, but the fact is we're a commercial brewery. We have to expose our brewing operation to other sectors of the market too. We've brewed lager for well over 60 years now. 50 years, and we're very good at it. And that's an essential part of keeping the operation going. If it was purely cask, then it's harder and harder and harder in a diminishing market to keep things going. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of something that you've done to protect that kind of cask range and the importance of cask. I think culturally, is the PGIs.
Yeah.
Which I've always known that 4 of your beers are sort of protected geographically, but until I started researching for this, the importance of that never really hit me, because we sort of waxed lyrical about, lambics and Munich Hellers and Kolsch's all having these sort of designated origins. And I don't think anybody in the UK really talks about the fact that we have one, which is Kentish, well, 2 Kentish ale and strong Kentish ales.
Yeah.
What's the sort of the definition of that, and how did that come about?
It all really comes back to the hop heritage in this area and the use of hops and the use of water on this site. People have been drawing, as you would have heard, water from the centre of this brewery since 1573. The origins go way back to the Faversham Abbey, but this is also the home of the hop, Faversham, and that's really important to us. So the type of hops, the East Kent Goldings, etc., which have got their own PGI, interestingly, the type of hops that are grown here are very different from some of the hops that you'll get from Germany or overseas.
Or even Hereford and Worcester, I guess.
Or even, we don't talk about Hereford. But indeed, they are very different. But also, if you think way back into the history of beer, there were 2 types of beer. There was ale, which was the Old English tradition, which was using bog myrtle and other hedgerow herbs before hops. And then there was beer, which was with hops. Now, the first evidence of use of hops in this country comes from Faversham. It's a boat that sunk in 970 AD and was discovered exactly 1,000 years later in 1970, and it had hop resin in it. And it was a trading boat going from here to northern France, and they're all collecting hops from that area that still has hops today, Hazebrook and Poperinghe. So, the first hop gardens in England that are registered, large hop gardens, were just across the road here. 1520. The first evidence of us using hops in this brewery come from a place called Homestall, which is just on the edge of town. Today, 80% of our hops come from this area, and a large proportion of them are those classic Kent hops, like East Kent Golding. So the heritage and history behind brewing beer, i.e. ale with hops, beer on this site, from this source of water, using those local hops and keeping that tradition going, I think is fundamental to our identity, fundamental to the taste, the flavour, the flavour profile of our beers, which are quite mellow, of our cask beers, quite a mellow, grassy, earthy hop, and quite a bitter swallow.
We talked about this a lot on the channel, but the idea of, it's not just cask that we're looking to protect and want to champion, it's also all the other things that are fed into that. So it's the history of Faversham is built on hops and brewing. Many of the, I guess, sort of the reasons you might visit Kent are based around breweries, based around farming, based around sort of this idea of the garden of England to some extent. And it feels like as industry left Faversham, brewing has been one of the things that's really kept this town, well, I think it's gone through tough times, but as close as it can be to flourishing, and certainly flourishing more today.
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, Faversham is on the up at the moment, because I think people are realising what a rich tapestry of history this town has got. If Kent is the Garden of England, as you say, we like to think of Faversham as the Garden of Kent. If you look at the natural topography, it's not just the hops, it's not just, there's all the cherry tradition, there's all the apple and fruit tradition that goes with it. There's also oysters, not only in Whitstable, just up the road, but also in Faversham. And those traditions go right back to Roman times. Faversham, I think, is the hidden gem, the hidden jewel of Kent, rather overshadowed by Canterbury Cathedral and all the sort of history that goes with Canterbury. But this is a very, very rich and interesting town. And of course, there were 2 breweries here. Right across the road, there was latterly Fremlin's, but before that it was called George Beer and Rigdon, and 2 quite large-scale breweries operated directly opposite each other using the same source of water for 250 years, which is pretty remarkable. So we're thrilled still to be able to keep that tradition going, and as you will see for yourself, we are right in the heart of the town, which even with the many other heritage breweries in the country, but many have relocated at some stage to the edge of the town or to a new site. We haven't. We're exactly where we were. So I always describe ourselves as being the jam and the donut of the town. The town revolves around us. And I also think the DNA of this business linked very much to the history, that there was no one single proprietor that put a sort of stake in the ground and said, I'm going to build a brewery here. It evolved as a community business because beer was a staple, more reliable than the water way back in medieval times. The community of Faversham needed a brewery, and of course the mindset, the culture of that is a phrase that is still used in Germany today, I'm told, that beer is regarded not as some form of alcoholic leisure product, but as liquid bread. It is the principal way of getting sustenance into your body for the community, made by the community. And I like to think that that sense of DNA and culture still exists today in this brewery with multiple families, not just the Neame family, but multiple families who worked here for multiple generations in the heart of the town, providing a product and a service for the local community.
Mm-hmm. And that extends to the pubs as well. So Brad and I went on a pub crawl last night of many of the Shepherd Neame pubs, and we were looking at it was like the drinks menu of one of the pubs, and then they had a list of every landlord way back into, it was like the 17th century, like all different names, different families, sometimes little dynasties that had it for a couple of years. But you know, having a brewery locally must have also sustained, you know, some of the most beautiful pubs I think I've ever been in. Like we were in the Bear and the Sun are just stunning places which Shepherd Neame have enabled.
And I think what is absolutely remarkable, and I take no credit for this, but what is remarkable with some of those pubs is they are relatively untouched for many generations, the Bear being probably the most classic with a listed interior. But you know, the Bear, the brewery's owned since 1786. As a pub, you probably didn't get to the 3 tons, just slightly further out. We've owned since 1715. The Anchor down the road, we've owned since 1736, I think. And it is extraordinary, I think, that connection between beer and pubs. We're very fortunate to have so many amazing buildings, particularly in this area, because it's a very historic heritage area. Lots of exposed beams like this room. And no, it's an enormous and privileged legacy to be, you know, a small part in that journey of the company.
And I think, you know, again, we talk about protecting cask, but that also means protecting pubs, because I think cask is very much the lifeblood of pubs. You can't really enjoy cask ale at home unless you're a very good home brewer. So you have to go to the pub for cask, and the pubs rely on that kind of trade. It's as important as I think food is today in the modern pub.
100%. I think it is a principal reason for going out. It is a key differentiator. Customers are very alert to who keeps their beer best. There's still that debate which has been going on for hundreds of years about, you know, where can you find the best pint of this and the best pint of the other. You know, beer is a differentiator generally, and within the individual pubs within a town. The person that keeps the best cask beer, it is therefore assumed that they keep all the rest of their beer great, and they have great food or whatever it might be. So, you know, I think that is a core reason why cask will continue, will survive. It might be at a low ebb in terms of its sort of overall penetration of the market, but it's still an astonishing product that is remarkably good value too, compared to other products on the bar, that gives a genuinely unique taste and flavour. We don't probably do enough to shout about that, so grateful for this opportunity. But the more that is recognised, the more I have hope that it'll, you know, come back strongly again in the future.
Like many historic breweries, Sheps has of course modernised most of its brewing processes, making for a confusing but aesthetic mix of old wood, stainless steel, 80s tiles, ancient cobble, wrought iron or copper, and, well, more stainless steel. The result is beer with a genuine link to the past, but that's made in a very modern way. So the history is super apparent when you come on. You called it the Hill, right?
Yes.
I think it's slightly exaggerating what's going on here, but it is like, you know, you've got these bricks that are explaining 1748 there, or
some of the original brewhouse components here, and the cobbled street that runs down the centre of the brewery. It kind of highlights the general history. So whilst we're running with modern technology, we do like to highlight and preserve, more importantly, the historical aspects of Shepherd Neame. We are, after all, Britain's oldest brewer.
Indeed.
So we should celebrate that.
Yeah.
What we're looking at above us would be the old grain-off chutes. So the mash tuns that we've seen earlier in the day would be positioned effectively just there, if you can kind of envision them. And the premise would be that a horse and cart dray would come up the hill. The fresh spent grain would be shot straight into the back, and they'd go off to a farmer's field somewhere. That technology has been updated, but the premise has remained the same. historically, and this is one that I've certainly heard, you can see the traditional aspect of the dray cart, where in which the drays used to get quite drunk because everywhere they'd visit would give them a pint or two. So it's pretty much just the horses
leading.
Or the
people. Oh right, it's the
no, mainly the people.
Sorry,
Thank God for the dray horses. They knew the route. They knew where they were going. But you can certainly see the scrapes along the wall where the carts used to scrape along.
The hill itself was once clearly the vein of the brewery. Alongside carts with deliveries and collections to the brew house, on the other side was the floor maltings, where barley was germinated and then dried, ready to brew with.
On site, we also have the remnants of our malt kiln. It used to be all the way along here, with what is now my office down the bottom of the hill, up to this building here. So we'd have a traditional 4 maltings, and we're talking a good few hundred years ago. And you can still see the rafters inside the offices that kind of demonstrate where the floor maltings were.
Oh, yeah, nice.
And it would all be malted and kilned on site with Kentish barley. Obviously, I don't think there's a brewery in England that still malts their own barley, purely on the basis of expense. Instead, we rely upon British producers like Crisp. What we have done, however, is keep the historical remnants of the kiln, and you can still see the tools inside, you can still see the char on the brickwork, where we used to make our own malt, ranging from ale all the way through to crystal.
The maltings may be gone, but further down the hill and deep underground is the source of another vital ingredient in beer, and the reason why the brewery is where it is. Its use is also the first requirement for the PGI because of its unique character.
So there's no well here.
There is no well here. It's probably a good 100 or so feet below your feet. We have, and have always had, it's the main reason the site was chosen, way back when, by the original shepherds.
Somewhere in the
and
1500s or 1600s, possibly
yes,
the 1100s.
Exactly. It was the water. There is a natural aquifer below our feet. It is still happily pumping out many, many, many meters cubed of water. It is filtered through chalk. It takes about 7 years to get from source to us. And it's effectively the liquor that goes into everything we do on site. Beneficially, we don't have to pay Southern Water. It's ours. We own it, which is good.
Scott was eager to get to the beautiful and historic Blue Mill, which was busy crushing malt for a Spitfire brew, but I was still hung up on the water.
The water that you're using is from your own artesian.
Yep.
Wow, what's the character of that water?
So the character of that water is very hard,
Right.
which is perfect for your kind of Kentish styles where you want there to be a decent salt balance towards the carbonate end and all that kind of stuff. It's really good for pH balancing and that kind of thing. It's no good if we want to do, for example, a very hop-forward beer.
So the beers that you have brewed here have been adapted slightly to that water, like they're all a little bit darker, they're all quite...
Exactly, your very traditional Kentish beers. So you're talking your Master Brews, your Bishop's Finger, your Spitfire. Very traditional Kentish beer, so they've got a quite dry character. They've got a very low PG, we call it, which is basically amount of sugar left after from fermentation. So they end up being a very traditional British, brown, wet, nice, easy drinking character, which is suited, generally speaking, to our profile.
So this is the mill. It looks like it's been around for a while.
So yes, this mill has been around for a very long time. There's actually only one person in the country that can service this mill.
I think I've got his phone number, because it's usually like on a plaque on the mills.
Yep.
It's the same guy for every brewery.
It is. You'll find a lot of the old English brewers typically have a mill like this. So it's a very age-old design. It's a roller mill. So effectively, what we have here is a screen going through the top, coming down into 2 sets of rollers that we can adjust the heights of, and that will crush our grain into different profiles.
From there we headed to the beautiful mash tuns, which are a great metaphor for Shepherd Neame's approach of using technology to make its traditional beers more sustainable and delicious.
So these beautiful things have some dates on them. So this is 110 years old.
The original mash tuns are over 100 years old. These things used to be wooden, entirely wooden.
Right, inside, outside.
Yes, inside, outside. Very traditional mash tuns. We got them reconditioned, but you couldn't get rid of the old wood, so instead we clad them with the original wood.
I mean, it's a beautiful thing, isn't it?
This is original. You'll also notice what we didn't replace was the mashing cannon, which is a one-of-a-kind. Yes, mashing cannon, that's what we call it. In general brewers' terms, it's a hydrator. So it's the exact same as any hydrator. You'll have in any brewery. Which
but other ones aren't copper.
The other ones aren't copper and brass,
Yeah.
and completely custom. An absolute nightmare if anything breaks on them because we have to get them specially made.
Yeah.
But it's a great centerpiece. This one's obviously a bit dirty because we've been brewing today.
Next we went round the corner to the coppers, which seemed to hum as the beers boiled within them. It's here where the Kentish hops are added, some of which are varieties that have grown in this area for centuries. This makes them the second requirement for the PGI status of some of the beers.
So these big vibrating steamy things is where you're boiling?
Yes, so as I mentioned earlier, we run 2 streams in the brewery. So we run a mash ton stream and a lauter ton stream. Both of them end up in 2 separate coppers, depending on the stream, copper 1, copper 2. Generally speaking, we're talking standard brewing practice. We're boiling for around about 30 to 45 minutes, depending on what beer we're doing.
We're a little bit short, like the cliche is an hour, right? And you guys
that's a micro-brewing cliche. You'll find most of the bigger brewers tend to, because we've got incredibly efficient heating processes, we can reach a rolling boil very quickly.
Finally, we headed to the cellar, or the tun room as it's known at Shepherd Neame, where the beers go to ferment and the brewery's historic yeast is propagated from slides that are cryogenically frozen at a yeast bank. This forms the final requirement for the PGI, and in combination with the local hops results in a dry, spicy flavour that pervades all of Shepherd Neame's beers.
Most breweries we walk in, it's usually the same. There's single infusion or there might be lautering going on.
Yep.
And then you walk through to the next room, particularly in older breweries, and all hell breaks loose. And there's all these tanks that I'm not necessarily sure I know what they do, but I'm sure they're all vital.
Incredibly vital. I'd actually argue these are some of the most important tanks in the entire brewery.
Okay.
We're currently in the tun room, so if you think of it as a Downton Abbey style upstairs, downstairs. Upstairs is all your brew house activities, all the way up to the copper.
The glamour stuff, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then once we get past the copper stage down into the whirlpool, it's the job of the tun room to make sure it gets to the fermenter vessel properly, and more importantly, make sure it's fermenting. Okay, so where we're currently standing is our YPTs, which are effectively our yeast storage tanks.
What can you tell us about the Shepherd Neame yeast?
We have had it for pretty much the age of the modern brewery at least, so we're talking probably 100 plus years. And it goes in every single one of our ale brews. So in terms of a characteristic, it's a workhorse of a yeast. If you think along the lines of sort of Nottingham, South Ale, that kind of stuff, we're talking yeasts that achieve a pretty solid PG.
Dry, it's fast, it's...
Exactly. It also has quite a unique ester profile at the end of it that gives kind of that quality that Master Brew and Spitfire and Bishops have. So yeah, effectively it's a pretty solid yeast.
How would you describe that?
How would I describe that? Very Kentish, I think I'd describe it. So your very traditional English best bitter kind of yeast. So like a typical ale yeast, it's got quite a good diacetyl reabsorption rate. But you do occasionally leave that little bit of diacetyl behind, like a lot of best bitters do. But then it's also got that kind of earthy, spicy kind of vibe going on that complements the hops. Your Challenger, your
it feels like they've kind of come together over a century of both being sort of dry and earthy and spicy.
We've been using these very traditional Kentish hops for about the same amount of time that we've been using this traditional yeast. So they've kind of, I guess, grown up together and impart that very Shepherd Neame characteristic on our beers.
As the biggest family-owned brewery in the UK, each Shep's batch is massive. Until recently, that made experimenting with modern processes, ingredients and styles a very risky venture. But barely 2 years ago, a new small batch brewery was installed to work on new beers and to supply the 300-strong pub estate with various seasonal beers. We were given a tour and an exclusive taste of their new Nitro Stout by brewing manager Rupert.
So Rupert, you're brewing manager here.
That's right.
But you have said off camera that this is where you like to play, right?
This is the fun bit.
This is the small batch brewery.
This is a small batch brewery.
How long have you had this?
Oh, about 18 months now. It's probably been operational.
Relatively new toy.
Relatively new, yeah. And
but you've got a lot of tanks here that you can ferment in. So are you doing a lot of experiments, or you want to do more?
we are not doing as many as I'd like to do. We're not using all the capacity we've got at the moment, but we are doing a little bit of experimentation and learning for the main brew house, and we are doing quite a bit of commercial brewing for our own estate.
So we've been talking about some of the beers that you've produced. There's some pretty unusual flavours like blueberry IPAs, classic saisons.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So, for several years we've been kind of had a program of experimental brewing, which was in the main brew house. But that is just a little bit terrifying because the minimum batch size is 110 barrels.
Yeah.
And you know, you don't really want to be experimenting with 110 barrels and pushing the boat out and seeing what will happen, and risking the fact that you might have to chuck it down the drain ultimately if it doesn't meet your kind of vision.
Yeah.
Whereas in here, you know, it's like a much more manageable volume for experimentational purposes. So you know, we can use different yeast strains. So saison yeast, for instance. I wouldn't put that anywhere near the main brew house. Just the complexity level just goes through the roof, you know. And we've already got 3 yeast strains up there that we need to keep in good condition and stuff. So we don't, you know, some yeasts are kind of a little bit scary, and I would say saison is one of them. Wild yeasts, anything like that. So you know, we're looking at kind of doing sours. We're looking at doing kind of fruited beers in the future. We've been doing, you know, some heavily hopped IPAs. We've been doing some saisons. We did an unfiltered pilsner that was just pretty much how it sounds. It was like a very straight ahead continental style lager, but with no kind of processing around it at all.
Should we go? So you've got some stuff in tank. We could have a little
Yeah,
go
sure,
on.
sure.
Should we have a little look at that?
No worries. Yeah, let's do that. Let's do that.
So what beer are you going to pour for us?
We're going to pour a experimental development batch of what we're hoping is going to be our next new main brewhouse beer, which is a stout, and it's going to be called Iron Wolf.
It's got a lovely look and body to it already in the head.
Yeah,
It's got like some
yeah.
natural carb in there.
Yeah, it has a bit of natural carbonation. Obviously, it's been kind of cold conditioning for quite a long time, so it's kind of developed a little bit more.
It's delicious. Cocoa and coffee.
Lots of
Sweeter notes.
yeah, lots of those kind of classic stout notes, really. You know, we're wanting this to be a fairly kind of you know, friendly, approachable, easy drinking kind of stout. Obviously, some debate to be had about what ABV we're going to brew it at. This is at 5 at the moment, which is my preferred number, but you know, we'll see what happens.
Explain sort of the nice tongue-coating sweetness that's on there that maybe you wouldn't get at 4. But
well, exactly. But you know, we'll have to sort of play with it a bit and see what we can do. And you know, when it's nitrogenated, it gets a really nice kind of creamy head.
Yeah.
To it, yeah.
So I mean, obviously, this is quite a trendy style at the moment. Mostly, I think, because of the big G. But lots of small breweries also playing around with it. As well.
It's a fun style.
Yeah. What's it? What do you think people's expectations are with a Shepherd Neame sort of small batch brew? Have people been surprised by, say, the blueberry IPAs and saisons?
Yeah, I think they have, and obviously that's a good thing. You know, one of the downsides of being a brewery that's around for a long time is a lot of people get a fixed idea of who you are and what you're about, and some of that might be true, and some of it might not be true, and some of it may be stuff we might want to change. So, you know, I think, you know, we're capable of going well outside our kind of core range. You know, and I'm not trying to disparage. You know, we've been, you know, Bishop's Finger's been around since 1958. People still love it. You know, sales go up, sales go down. Fine, it's a brand. We're going to keep making that. Similarly with Spitfire, been around since, you know, the early 90s or 1990. And a lot of people love that, and they're still excited about it, so that's fantastic. But obviously there are lots of people that aren't excited by those brands, but we still want to encourage them to bring them into our pubs, enjoy some nice beers, enjoy some food. If it's a hotel, maybe stay overnight. You know, there's a whole big picture, and you know, my part of that big picture is making, you know, getting the beer offer right, and you know, helping us keep our beer offer kind of exciting and interesting and kind of relevant to the taste of the people that come into our pubs.
I don't know. It's a really interesting switch from what we usually do, because often, you know, in sort of the craft beer market, the small craft beer market, what drives sales is often scarcity, right? It's like you might only have one chance to try this particular beer, this hot combination, this collaboration. When I'm drinking a beer in this room, it's a little part of me that's looking at the tanks and going, well, which one of these is going to be the sort of heritage brand in 50 years? So people are going to watch this video and go, oh, that was the first time that it was tried on camera, or whatever it is. So for me, that's quite exciting. I don't know whether for you that's slightly nerve-wracking, or whether it's just like hugely satisfying that there's that opportunity there, at least, to be part of this incredible history.
I mean, it is very satisfying. I mean, I love the history. I mean, I love history full stop. I'm a bit of a history buff. Not an expert, but I enjoy it. And then the history of the brewery is fascinating. The history of the brewing in Faversham is fascinating. And yeah, there is, you know, I don't want to kind of let the side down. You know, I'm not Faversham born and bred, but I've lived here since 2007. I just, you know, for me, the reason I got into brewing in the first place was as an enjoyer of beer. And I'm somebody who likes to create things that I enjoy. And then, you know, if I just really want other people to enjoy the beers that I'm involved with, whether that's, you know, I brewed it at home or brewed it at the brewery with the team. You know, that's the key thing for me is just customer enjoyment, and also my enjoyment, because I'm going to be one of those customers.
It wasn't quite the answer I was expecting, but it was a very good one. brewing delicious beer that people want to drink should always be the focus of a brewery, large or small, historic or open last week. Obviously everyone claims that they're doing that, but Rupert wanted to talk about nothing else. At such a historic brewery, the ability to look endlessly forward has to be a good thing. But as filmmakers, we get to look backwards too, which is why we decamp back to the Sun Inn where we started, to digest the incredible few days we'd spent learning about not just brewing history, but British history, and how the two are completely intertwined.
I think Jonathan put it really well when he said that Shepherd Neame was the jam in the donut of Faversham. It really is the heart of this town, and it always has been. And that's amazing.
Yeah, it was really interesting to hear from John and from Jonathan how when the industries such as gunpowder and cement disappeared, brewing was what kind of kept this town going, and if anything has become more important over the years to the history and indeed the future of Faversham. And we've seen, we've been on lots of historic brewery tours now, so Hook Norton, Adnams, but this one, feels like it has real historical significance, both for the location, but also for everything else involved in brewing. So for farming, for pubs, for politics to some extent, because that's the biggest independent brewery in the UK and should be seen as like a beacon, whatever kind of brewery you are, of success.
Yep.
Really. And we're incredibly lucky as a country to have breweries like this, also with CEOs or managing directors that understand that mission.
It's amazing to think this is the point of origin for what we consider modern British brewing today.
Yeah, that addition of hops is sort of the final big change that happened. And it's amazing that they have protected that. And like I said to Jonathan, I think that story is hugely underplayed in British beer, that we have a PGI, a protected designation of origin. You can only make this style of Kentish ale with the right water and hops from within 10 miles of this brewery. And, it's a real shame that source of water can't be spread elsewhere, so we can make a really big thing of this. But it's also kind of the point and the joy of it, that there is this historic brewery that makes this, that is so connected to the start of British beer brewing. Provenance isn't just sort of this fancy thing that you talk about in chefing to say, oh, well, the food didn't come far. No, it's about connecting to the history and the industry and the people and the stories that make these beers even more special than what's in the glass. So these are the. I realise we haven't drunk much beer in this episode because it's just been the most fascinating history lesson. But lots of these beers have that PGI. So Bishop's Finger 1698, which actually been my favourite of the trip. A really delicious sort of. It's a Kentish strong ale. It's a PGI. It's a big, bold, amber, hoppy, nettly. These beers are unique to this space, and in a modern beer world where you often buy your hops, your malts from the same place, often your yeast from the same place, it's really important that these styles of beers, whatever you think of the actual liquid itself, these styles of beers continue to exist because they will always be unique because of that chalk stream, the chalk well that they're taking it from.
Just imagine what it's taken for this to survive over the centuries.
Yeah.
It's nearly been taken out by inheritance tax.
Yeah. By
gunpowder, by world wars.
Yeah.
And somehow they've persevered.
Yeah.
And that's pretty amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. Context is incredibly important historically for why things exist and why they're brilliant now. So yeah, if you haven't drunk some Shepherd Neame beers in a while, absolutely come to Faversham. What an incredible place, incredible
beautiful
pubs, a wonderful brewery tour that you can do. And yeah, absolutely blown away by this trip. So huge shout out to the Neame family and the Shepherd family before them, and the Mayors and the Marshes, and all the people that are involved in making sure that this absolute bastion of British culture still exists and still thrives today. It's Kentish Ale.
It's Kentish Ale.
This episode was shot as part of our Keep Cask Alive documentary series. You can watch the 7 original fascinating episodes at the link at the end of this video. But before you do, please consider signing our petition on the UK government website and joining our Patreon so we can keep putting together videos and campaigns just like this.